third panel of the conference. And on this panel, the organizer, Robert Rahman Raman, will be the first speaker. And my role is simply to welcome and introduce the chair of this panel, Ravi Ahuja, a professor at the Center for Modern Indian Studies at the University of Göttingen, where he heads the research group on modern Indian history. Ravi Ahuja's work has spanned many different aspects of India's social history from the 18th to the 20th century, including urban history, the history of infrastructure, and the social history of war. We are looking forward to his forthcoming book, Shipping Lords and Coolie Stokers, on race, class, and maritime capitalism in the early 20th century. So, Ravi, please take over from here.
Right. Just 1 second. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to chair the session because I can't see the participants. And so that might be a bit of a problem, but I will rely on your support. So I think we can begin immediately actually with the presentation. Prerna, I see, is also here online. Robert, of course, is present. So perhaps we would begin with Prerna's presentation first. So you have 20 minutes. After that, Robert, then I would have a few short comments and we could enter the discussion.
Ravi, for reasons of my schedule here, I would need Robert's presentation to go first, if that's all right with you.
That's also okay.
Okay, all right. So Robert first then.
Okay. Thank you all for coming here today. I'll straight up jump to my presentation. The paper is on Bombay on the Eve of Independence, 1946-47, popular solidarities and culminating polarization. Basically, in this paper, I look at the history of Bombay at the eve of independence and trying to look at the plurality of historical experiences the city witnessed and residents of the city witnessed during these 2 years. So the final year of colonial rule have been primarily characterized both in written histories and popular memory by communal riots and the partition of Indian subcontinent, leading to the birth of two new nation states. Maintaining that the late 1940s in India should not be reduced to the twin events of partition and independence, Ravi Ahuja, in a recent article, has advocated examining the complexity of the historical moment by a plurality of historical experiences existing on the eve of independence. The city of Bombay appears to be a case in point here. Besides the sharpening communal conflict, unprecedented industrial strikes, and united anti-British actions marked the last years of colonial rule. Bombay and its socially diverse inhabitants not only negotiated with these varied and contending currents, but even emerged as a significant protagonist during these moments of popular contestation. This paper moves beyond this selective remembrance concerning the closing years of colonial rule and maps out the city's alternate strand of popular politics. I argue that these unrealized alternative possibilities of popular mobilization gave the city's political climate a certain degree of plurality and fluidity, while chronicling the increasing frequency and magnitude of the communal rioting and social segregation in the city. The paper demonstrates that despite the unprecedented ferocity of the 1946-47 riots and the communally polarized provincial elections of 1946, the dramatic events of the Royal Indian Navy mutiny and industrial protests highlight that the alternate potentialities of class-based solidarity and all-inclusive anti-colonial popular politics were by no means completely exhausted. So I start with the post-Shimla riots in the city, post-Shimla conference riots in the city. In the post-war period, towards the end of 1945, Bombay was again gripped by the further worsening of the inter-community relationship and engulfed in rioting soon after the breakdown of Shimla Conference in 1945. Besides the instances of assault and stabbing, the rioting involved attacks on places of religious worship. Trams passing through Bhindi Bazaar would empty at Crawford Market at the southern end and Baikala Bridge at the northern end. No Muslim would enter the Girgaon, Kaladevi or Lalbagh, Parel or Dadar. In the wake of the protracted and frequent communal rioting, the city's localities turned into fortified enclaves. Communities began to restrict their spatial boundaries and protect their spaces against rival communities or political groups. As the city began to divide into rival mohallas and wadis, any attempt by competing social and political groups to claim the opponent's space led to communal discord, and which we see on Subhash Chandra Bose's birth anniversary on 23rd January 1946. The solidarity which was seen in November, where students came out in support of the Azad Hind Fauj Day, that solidarity seems to be breaking up by late January, early February. The political unity witnessed during the INA trials in the last months of 1945 was missing during the call to observe Subhash Day in late January 46, which was reciprocated primarily in Hindu localities. All shops in the Hindu localities up to Golipitha remained closed, but beyond that, shops and establishments in the Muslim neighborhood remained open. Similar response was seen on the Captain Rashid Day on February 12, 1946, when the day was largely observed in the Muslim mohallas. A closer look into this period reveals that it was also marked by alternate possibilities of popular solidarity. Popular anti-colonial upsurges like the RIN revolt, though momentarily, weaved a remarkable political unity on the city's streets. The revolt began with the hunger strike of 1,000 Indian ratings of the signal training establishment, HMS Talwar. And some of you might know about the RN mutiny. These sailors demanded better food, wages, and allowance, along with action against racist insult and the release of all political prisoners, including those from the INA. A sense of panic swept across Fort and Kolaba's locality, symbolizing the colonial Raj's power. When on 19 February, a contingent of Indian naval ratings in their battle uniform took control of these localities. On 21st February, the threat of a full-scale military conflict hung over the city as the rebel ships, in response to the firing by British military, manned guns and began to hoot their intentions of defending their fellow ratings on shore. By the afternoon, Hindu and Muslim inhabitants of the city came out supporting the ratings. They marched from Victoria Terminus towards the Indian town, urging people to observe Hartal in protest of the firing on RIN ratings. The city woke up to witness a popular rebellion against colonial rule on 22nd February. From early morning, a heterogeneous crowd of workers, students, and urban poor gathered on the streets to defy the colonial authorities' power to control the city's civic arena. A procession of bus drivers and conductors in uniform marched past Flora Fountain and joined another procession of students and laborers. The Hartal was much more intense in the Indian town and the Mill district. The bazaar area of the Indian town witnessed large-scale disturbance and violence as people barricaded various localities with boulders and barrels. One of the most significant features of this short-lived rebellion was the Hindu-Muslim solidarity on the city's streets and the fading of spatial divisions and hostility between communities. Muslim localities, which used to be comparatively quiet during the preceding nationalist observations, emerged as the storm center of this popular rebellion. Muslims in Bhindi Bazaar barricaded Ibrahim Rahimutullah Road. In a rare display of communal unity, processionists marched with the Congress, Communist and Muslim League flags. With considerable support for the Hartal from the city's working poor, Bombay's mill district emerged as its epicenter for the next 2 days. All the textile mills, along with the railway workshops and other factories, remained closed. Schools and colleges followed suit, as did best and tram workers. Since early morning, workers took control of the mill district. They lit bonfire from Dadar to Mahim, all along the road, to observe the movement of the patrolling parties. A cross-section of people from various communities, comprising of the workers and the city's urban poor, driven by their anti-British sentiment and economic precariousness in the post-war world, came out on the streets. This popular rebellion in the city, which effectively challenged the colonial authorities' power to control the city, was met with a burst of machine guns and a charge of fixed bayonets, killing 97 people. While the ratings surrendered on 23rd February, the mill area and the city's workers remained defiant. As the British Army in their armoured carriers moved towards quelling the rebellion, workers retreated into the narrow lanes of the mill district. They barricaded it to challenge the approaching battalions effectively. A pitched battle was fought at Kamatipura and Madanpura, where Hindu and Muslim mill workers erected barricades and pelted stones and petrol bombs at the approaching British military personnel. After a fierce and unequal street fighting, the British Army could restore order in the Bombay city only after killing 228 civilians and injuring 1,046 individuals. This casualty was much bigger than 1946 riot in the city. And in 3 days, around 228, this is conservative estimate, people were killed. And while the RN mutiny ensured a popular fraternization on the barricades and the streets of Bombay, the possibility of a prolonged and resolute Hindu-Muslim unity remained unrealized on the electoral front. There was an apparent disjunction between the marked Hindu-Muslim unity on the street of the winter of 1945-46 and the predominantly communal voting in provincial elections during the same months by an enfranchised minority. Bombay presidency was no exception. The Congress got 84.14% of the votes in the general seats, and the League obtained 93.23% of the Muslim votes. The polarization in favor of the Muslim League in the city can be understood from the election results of Bombay City North and Suburban District Constituency. Ali Bahadur Khan represented the constituency with the highest number of votes in the 1937 election. Contesting as a candidate for Majlis-e-Ihrar in the 1946 election, Khan's campaign managed to get little support from the voters. Election results further proved the overwhelming response the Muslim League got in the Muslim working class localities. While both the candidates from Muslim League got over 29,000 votes, Ali Bahadur Khan merely managed to get around 1,900 votes. The early months of 1946 were not only characterized by communal riots, a short-lived anti-British upsurge, and communally polarized provincial elections. It was a time of remarkable, indeed unprecedented labor unrest as well. In the first 9 months of 1946, Bombay witnessed a series of strikes by the city's socially diverse wage earners, including the salaried middle class. To ensure the redressal of their material grievances, Bombay's primary school teachers went on strike as the government and the local authorities failed to pay them what they termed a living wage. To impress upon the authorities the urgency of their grievances, hundreds of Hindu and Muslim school teachers, including women teachers, marched towards the secretariat with black flags. The strike fever in the city continued with the strike of 13,000 sweepers, who struck work demanding an increase in basic wages and better service conditions. From June to August 1946, workers employed in iron and steel works, textile mills, mints, government press and railways, along with drivers, fitters, clerks, dock workers and bank employees, struck work for better wages, fair treatment and a right to a decent life and adequate return against their work. Through these labor protests, Bombay's socially diverse workforce came together to express their collective and moral outrage against their economic precariousness during a period marked by economic recession and retrenchment. The general strike in support of the postal workers was one such instance of impressive unity among Bombay workers, which was becoming a rarity during the sharpening of communal discord. Nearly 500,000 wage earners staged a successful complete general strike in the city to demonstrate their solidarity with the post and telegraph workers' strikes, demanding an increase in wage and standard rule regarding pay, leave and day-onus allowance. Along with the mill workers, workers employed in the railway workshops, dock, tram and bus services, gas company, engineering factories, oil installments, hotel, glass workers, along with workers from the race course, stables, and sports club, clerks from post office, textile mills, insurance companies, and best, gumashtas from several business firms and students of schools, colleges came out on street. The significance of these strikes can be understood from the fact that Bombay's provincial government introduced Bombay Industrial Regulation Act, BIRA of 1946, which severely curtailed down collective bargaining and protest in September at a time when the labor upsurge had temporarily ebbed and given way to a protracted communal rioting in the city. The debate on the bill at a time when the city was engulfed in communal rioting underlines the urgency felt within the Congress to contain labor militancy. This impressive display of unity on the city's streets by the wage earners soon declined by September 1946. Bombay was under palpable communal tension, while the Hartal, called to observe the direct action, passed off peacefully. Bombay witnessed large-scale communal violence on 1st September 1946. The trouble started when, following Liaquat Ali Khan's appeal, Bombay Muslims hoisted black flags on their homes and places of business to express their contempt towards the new interim government. In response, big tricolors were hoisted across Sandhurst Road and west of Round Temple, close to the Muslim localities, leading to a battle of flags and slogans accompanied by stone throwing and to mark respective localities. This competitiveness to mark the boundaries of their respective territories revived the communal hostility between Hindus and Muslims. From early September 1946, the city again witnessed a series of communal riots which extended well into the next year. These protracted communal conflicts first affected the socially intermixed localities of Indian towns where rival mobs clashed, single individual attacked, and shops looted. Rioting threatened the distinct urban culture of the city. Though initially unaffected, the mill district could not escape this prolonged communal discord for long. Attendance of Muslim workers in the textile mills saw a decline as Hindu workers objected to their presence and occasionally went on strike to ensure their discharge. And now I'm coming to protection groups. In the midst of these communal writings, you also see emergence of protection group, which it seems like is a silver lining at this conjuncture. The protracted writings led to further ghettoization of the city on communal lines and the formation of Suraksha Dal, protection groups, to defy respective localities from attacks. Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, in his autobiography, recounts this experience with the Suraksha Dal. He mentions a fierce discussion over the appointment of INA personnel to guard the Shivaji Park neighborhood. Although there was a unanimity in the appointment of unemployed INA personnel, some members of the committee opposed the INA's decision to send a socially heterogeneous squad that included members of Muslim community. The INA's refusal to entertain their request for an all-Hindu picketing team ultimately led to an all-community patrolling team in Shivaji Park. Abbas narrates how the INA's insistence... Sorry?
Okay.
Sorry? 4 minutes, yeah. The INA's refusal to entertain their request for an all-Hindu picketing team ultimately led to an all-community patrolling team in the Shivaji Park. Abbas narrates how the INA's insistence on communally intermixed patrolling squads reduced the fear of attack among the residents of the adjacent localities. These experiments in restoring normalcy and cordiality between the two communities inspired similar efforts to diffuse communal hostility. IPTA and the Progressive Writers Association came together to mobilize all the progressive cultural associations and organizations of Marathi, Gujarati, Hindi, and Urdu writers, artists, film workers, artists of Prithvi Theatre, and various other theatre groups in Bombay. In all 52 associations were mobilized to take out a unity procession which would parade from Bori Bandar to Bandra, passing through the exclusive Hindu and Muslim areas. The procession moved slowly through the streets in multiple trucks, carrying a range of cultural activists, actors, and famous Urdu, Hindi, Marathi, and Gujarati authors, along with a whole concourse of people. Such initiatives by political and cultural activists of the city not only removed the unseen barriers dividing Bombay, but underlined their specific intervention in upholding Bombay's distinct political culture. And this you can see on the day of the Independence Day in Bombay, which was unlike how Independence Day was felt in Delhi or many other places. In stark contrast to the prevailing social discord, Bombay witnessed celebrations and euphoria on the day of the independence, which lasted almost a week. Since the night of 14th August, people have stepped out to join the Independence Day celebration. Throughout the night, they moved around the city in cars, on the back of trucks, in Victorias, and on foot to see the planned illumination. The following day, multiple processions were brought out in the city. These processions included writers, members of taxi driver unions, ramas, who were called domestic helpers, and members of all walks of social lives. Leading Congress and League volunteers organizations also joined these processions. Just 1 minute. Throughout these processions, the ramas danced all the way. Artist groups staged miniature one-act plays, and Vyayam mandals, which in Bombay are called akharas, performed mock fighting drills. Members of both communities who feared entering into each other's territory moved freely across the city. Bhindi Bazar, Muhammad Ali Road, and Grant Road, once the storm center of the riot, witnessed Hindu-Muslim fraternization. At the Grant Road corner, thousands of Hindus and Muslims watched a tamasha together and raised Hindu-Muslim Bhai Bhai and Kala Bazar Band Karo slogans. Clearly, the purely economic issues of price control and black marketing were emerging as urgent grievances charged with political meaning and popular expectation in the post-independent country. Furthermore, the tricolors and crescents were combined over buildings, bridges, and vehicles. The Muslim League office also hoisted the tricolor flag. The Jama Masjid and the Zakaria Masjid were lit, and the local Muslim shopkeepers decorated their shops with national flags, indicating a transition from the British colonial space into Indian space. The fraternization in public, however, was not universally shared. About 15 members of the Hindu Mahasabha, who made failed attempts to hoist and take out procession with saffron flags, were arrested for defying the police commissioner's order to take out a procession carrying flags other than the flag of Indian dominion. I am concluding, cautioning us from reading history in the light of hindsight alone. Sumit Sarkar advocates approaching it with an openness to identify the existing alternative possibilities that remained unrealized and soon came to be submerged and largely forgotten. The last years of colonial rule in Bombay saw competing currents of popular mobilization acquired renewed momentum and increasingly manifest their presence in the civic arena. While the recurrent communal conflicts divided the city into multiple fortified enclaves, they did not subsume alternative historical experiences. Despite the apparent breakdown of intercommunal relations, post-war Bombay also witnessed a notable display of Hindu-Muslim solidarity on the city's streets during the industrial protest and the United Anti-British Mass Upsurge, which challenged the prevalent social and spatial segregation. The paper demonstrates that questioning the hegemonic patterns of historical remembrance remembrance can open a window to an alternative understanding of Bombay's political landscape's rich complexities and diversity, which reveals the city's history as less inevitable and linear as often assumed. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So we will discuss the two papers that speak to each other together, and we'll move on immediately to Prerna's paper and move from Western India to the eastern metropolis of Calcutta.
Ravi, I just want to say that I must take my leave now and say goodbye to the people who have gathered here. I have another appointment at 3 o'clock, but I look forward to reading Prerna's paper later. And Robert, you may have to take your own questions, yes, given that Ravi cannot see the audience. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much all for being here.
Okay, so Prerna, please fire away.
Yep, I'm trying to share my screen, which is not happening. Robert, I'll share my screen so that I can show my presentation maybe. Is that okay or not?
Yeah.
So the technical support perhaps needs to permit you to share. Ah, there it is. Okay.
Okay, I think it's there, right?
It's there.
Okay. So yeah, for the workshop, I will draw your attention to the context of war and decolonization in shaping labor politics and a changing labor regime to the case of...
Sorry, just cutting you off. Could you full screen your screen, please, for the audience here?
What should I do?
Full screen, just press F5. If you can just put it on slideshow mode, that'll be helpful.
Oh yeah, the slides, you mean?
Yeah. You can just go to, or press F1, that'll also work.
I'll just do it. Okay. Yeah, so I'll present the context of the war and how it was very crucial for the changing labor regime at the Calcutta docks. I'll read my presentation. So you can see the position of Calcutta in the Second World War in this map. As the British Empire entered the World War II, immense uncertainties surrounded the labor question. Globally, we know that dock workers were at the forefront of labor militancy in the 1940s, as well as at the center of implementation of the post-war social policies. In such a scenario, the port of Calcutta, which served as an important military port in Southeast Asia after the fall of Singapore and Rangoon, provides a fine vantage point for beginning to understand the dramatic changes that a global war brought for Indian workers' everyday lives, for industrial relations, for the politics of labor, and for the shape of decolonization. My article on which this presentation is based explores workers' wartime experiences and a changing labor regime at the Calcutta's docklands, contributing to a recent trend of narrating transnational histories of Second World War, which go beyond the elite actors of great powers and illuminate uneven and connected processes that shaped war and peace in societies worldwide. The changing relationship of the state with the peasants, the army, and the common people during the war has been somewhat studied or at least narrated. My research deepens and extends our understanding of the 40s by showing how the crisis of the state and social power was felt acutely in the workplaces and was shaped by the labor question. During World War II, India not only supplied the troops as it had done in the previous World War, but became one of the major military, industrial, and logistical bases for operations in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. This required rapid expansion of technological facilities and industrial and transport infrastructure, in numbers of workers employed, in the multiplication of output, etc. Most crucially, the number of workers directly employed by the state, including in its coercive apparatus, the army, the navy, and the air force, expanded rapidly. The exigencies of the war had profound implications for the relationship between labor and a state in transition. In the existing scholarship, evidence from two major industries of colonial India, Calcutta's jute mills and Bombay's textile mills, indicates the high concentration of the strains of the war on the existing labor regime. However, the existing research does not examine how the state and employers were willing to act in unusual consonance during the war. This was the time that the policy of laissez-faire received the biggest pushback, a process that continued and was not initiated in the Nehruvian years. States' functions with respect to labor considerably expanded, including the setting up of the Department of Labor under the Government of India in 1942, a trade union federation with the aim of collaboration, the Indian Federation of Labor, and the introduction of rationing. These were precursors to a new regime of state-centered industrial relations in the post-colonial period, forged in the face of an unprecedented strike wave in the post-war period, which Robert has talked about a bit. The context of semi-state industry, which the docks was, allows for the examination of the growing intervention of state and labor relations during the war. The scale and intensity of changes at the docks surpassed even the textile or the jute mills. And in the paper, I also examined the role of workers in these momentous years, which has so far remained in the background by juxtaposing a study of the changes in labor regime with that of the distinct experiences of workers during the wartime. So I'll now go on to the changes that happened in the labor regime during the war. Located in the east and geographically close to the dangers of Japanese air and naval attacks, the Calcutta port remained largely untouched by the spike in wartime activities up until 1942. In a year's time, it was to emerge as the most important port in the newly opened China, Burma, and India theater. As a result, this is the China, Burma, and India theater. As a result of Japanese successes that blocked the Allies' access to ports such as Singapore, the US Army declared it the #1 port from October 1944. As a great congestion blocked the port in the winter months of 1943 and the expected doubling of the traffic for the newly set up operations of the Southeast Asia Command, that the Joint Transportation Committee decided to implement a series of radical measures. In administrative terms, a reorganization of the port was conducted through the Port Directorate, which was set up in 1944 on the initiative of and under the pressure from the US Army. It was established as a coordinating and control body with authority under the Defense of India rules to issue instructions to the various interests involved in running the port, including the Port Trust's various departments, stevedores, labor contractors, the Indian Jute Mill Associations, the British Army, the US Army Air Force, US Army Port Transportation, War Shipping Administration, USA. This is just to give an indication of the number of interests involved in the running up of the port at this time. The setting up of a transnational state body was crucial in shaking up the half-a-century-old labor regime. In a twist of history, the highly regulated labor regime of the post-independence talks was ushered in by the military authority of the Allies, the British and the Americans. It was through the militarization of labor that the first steps towards steadying labor were taken. From 1943 onwards, the greater part of the workforce directly employed by the Port Trust and the stevedores was enrolled in the Defense of India units. In the next few months, the existing defense units were complemented with specialized military units as Indian, British, and even African American soldiers now mingled in the docklands. Those employed as part of the military and Defense of India units had relatively better pay scales, rations, and allowances. The numerical extent of labor militarization can be gauged from the following numbers in 1944. 256 officers and 17,422 other ranks enrolled in the Port Defense of India units, and 3,856 other ranks in the Calcutta Stevedore Battalion, which meant basically most of the dock workers were militarized in one way or the other. The exigencies of the situation and the strained resources resulted in a patchwork of labor regimes running the port, which also broadened the horizons of expectations. The US Army took full control of one of the two dock systems, the King George's docks, from March 1944 onwards, and managed record shipping turnaround rates, reducing them from 8 to 3 days. The two port battalions employing 3,500 dockers under the supervision of army personnel worked the three-ship system at the King George's docks. The Anglo-American Port Directorate attempted to improve the coordination of labor supply across the various employers and establish control over the labor processes beyond the King George's docks. It was made clear to existing employers that rapid improvements in supervision of workers would have to be made. For instance, for the traffic department, which was the largest, a scheme for greater supervision in the docks and jetties and better ladders of promotion was set up. Workers found themselves under the double supervision of zone inspectors and assistant zone inspectors recruited mainly from the various military companies. Military personnel wearing armbands with MP written on them are prominent in the wartime pictures of Calcutta. The Directorate also intervened to improve the working conditions. The number of permanent and directly employed workers increased. It was suggested that methods of wage payments should be changed, for instance, granting bonuses for better work and incentives for speeding up. The issue of increasing wages and standardization of wages was pursued consistently. It is the degree of intervention in the management of Bird and Company, which employed the most casual section of port workforce, that is telling of the impetus for regulation of labor regime during the war in the interest of efficiency. The Directorate in particular demanded greater supervision of workers employed by this contractor and payment of sufficient wages. Under such pressures, Bird and Company switched from piece rate payments to daily rates for brief periods during the war. The port trust made inroads into the operation of the contractor, directly recruiting for the crucial coal dock, and a number of other sites were handed over to the army units. And it is very probable that they employed the same dockers who had previously been employed by the contractor. Consequently, the contractor's dockers' demands increasingly converged with those directly employed. They too were provided with regular increases in rationing and dearness allowances. With the end of the war, the port trust committed to meeting any extra expenditure by Bird and Company on minimum wage rates, social security, and housing in anticipation of statutory changes. It had become clear that the rolling back of employment conditions as they existed in the interwar period was no longer possible. These ad hoc measures taken under the direction of a transitional military body, the Directorate, laid the basis for a systematic transformation of the port labor regime, not only in Calcutta but across the Indian ports. Regulation of employment conditions of dock labor had been proposed as early as 1931 by the Royal Commission of Labour, but was only implemented in a staggered fashion from the late 1940s onwards. For instance, the key Dock Labor Regulation of Employment Act was legislated in 1948, and the official documentation stated that, I quote, "The object of these schemes is to ensure greater regularity of employment for dock workers and to secure an adequate supply of dock workers for the efficient performance of dock work," unquote. The goals of workers' welfare and efficiency had already become linked in a number of concrete ways, mostly under the threat of labor flight, shortages, and strikes during the war. The formal sector at the ports of the post-colonial state was thus built on the mechanisms and precedents of state interventions inherited from the war years. So I'll kind of skip a few sections. So what I argue in the paper, and I kind of give details about how dockers in various sections of the port receive a number of social security measures and their employment conditions get increasingly regulated in the 1950s. And the wartime changes proved to be irreversible and were in fact extended, most crucially, because of the pressures building up from below. So in this section, I just want to quickly talk through one of the strikes that happens in 1942, the year of the Quit India movement, and at a time when the fate of the Allies in the war was unclear. And this is a leaflet that I had found in 1942 related to the strike, which articulates a certain indifference to the war effort. So with the fall of Hong Kong, Singapore, Malay, and then Burma between December 1941 and March 1942 to the Japanese advances, great uncertainty prevailed in the labor world, especially in eastern India, as to what the future held. In Calcutta, the arrival of Burmese refugees, an exodus of nearly 1 million, the imminence of the Japanese invasion and hyperinflation all made the state appear as fragile as Kamtekar has argued. This phantom crisis of the state had very real implications for workers' perceptions of the urgency as well as the possibilities of waging a fight. Something that has been overlooked in the scant historiography that connects the Quit India movement and labor. And so what happens at the port is that the most important unions are beheaded just before the war. Yet workers articulated elaborate and novel wartime demands in pursuit of, as they argued, a life and death struggle for existence. At the port, an unofficial strike broke out in the first week of September 1942, involving 5,000 to 7,000 workers. They won an immediate rise in dearness allowances and planned another more extensive strike with contracted out workers from Bird and Company. The aims were stated in a, in a remarkable leaflet issued by a clandestine strike committee, which identified the brother workers of port commissioners and Bird and Company as its audience. So you have the leaflet there. So the leaflet is remarkable for a number of reasons. The authors of the leaflet articulated that workers were enduring great hardships during the war, not for the reasons of loyalty to the Raj, but for their own survival. Extensive war censorship made it extremely difficult to print and circulate leaflets that even hinted at anti-war sentiments, let alone propaganda. And after the CPI turned pro-war, such leaflets are rare finds. Historians have often assumed since CPI was advocating a policy of unhindered cooperation with the employers in the war effort, workers' voices were automatically silenced, completely missing the covert and open labor conflicts which can be discerned in this period. Through this leaflet, the strike committee was propagating an attitude of indifference to the war. This leaflet suggests that the state was unable to eliminate antagonistic and oppositional stances halfway into the war, which retained a great moral force. In the end, workers' acquiescence was gained by early December without the second strike taking place, because this leaflet is published between the first and the second strike. Still, 1942 made clear the repercussions of British wartime defeats for an Indian workplace, as it was to be the most eventful year in terms of collective action for the duration of the war. In fact, rationing was introduced across big workplaces in Calcutta and in other industrial cities almost simultaneously with the Quit India movement to dampen the nationalist mobilization. Workers were well aware of changes that employers at the port and outside were willing to make, and of the new welfare measures being discussed and debated in the recently established Labour Department at the All India level. Quit India movement was seized.
4 minutes for you now.
Quit India movement was seized to present elaborate demands, which for the first time included the abolition of the contract of the biggest labor contractor in the port and in Calcutta. Nationalist politicians rushed to assume leadership, yet a small number of worker activists, through their clandestine strike committee, maintained control over the brewing strike. They self-consciously molded a confrontation of considerable significance. So this is how they established their presence in front of the... is there any problem?
I think there's someone unmuted who should not be.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so this strike plays kind of shows the very contentious relationships between employers and workers even during the war, and sets the context for what happens in the post-war period. And I mean, I will not present the post-war situation really, which Robert went into it, but just to connect this to what happens then in the post-war period immediately is is that you see the largest number of strikes in colonial India. And what I've tried to do in my paper is to try and narrativize what happens in this. I mean, how do we understand the militancy in this period in a period in which there are strikes and riots, through thinking about a moment of labor. And what I tried to do is to connect three events to build my narrative: the general strike of 1946 in Calcutta, which is the first of its kind, the first general strike in Calcutta's history. The deadliest communal riots in August 1946, and this Calcutta port strike of 1947. So what is what the key argument here is that in the historiography of Bengal, especially, it suggests that there are no alternate visions and practices of politics that existed, especially after the Direct Action Day. And there are, and these arguments are becoming even more categorical nowadays with the political situation. And so historians have argued that intercommunity relations gradually collapsed and froze into identities, into solid blocks, etc. But even after the Direct Action Day, which is in 1946, in February and April of 1947, you have strikes each month, which of around 50,000 workers in Calcutta. And the two of the biggest strikes were sustained in the tramways and the Calcutta port, both of which employed almost equal proportions of Hindu and Muslim workers. So the same years that resulted in the deadliest communal riots and intensification of communal identity inspired some of the most powerful episodes of labor politics, where unity across religious lines was propagated and practiced. The swing between hope and despair, violence and solidarity were extremely sharp in these fluid years, something that historical narratives need to engage with. The field of political action had expanded with tremendous rapidity with the end of the war. Its narrowing was neither quick nor without consequences. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Prerna. Thank you. Yeah. So perhaps we can close the presentation now. Right. Okay. Great. Okay, so I'll make a few comments. So I'm sure that within the room there will be many also concrete questions concerning details also of the presentations, but I will confine myself to a few more general comments and questions, then ask Robert and Prerna to react, and then we'll take more questions. So I think going back actually to the purpose of the workshop, we can now safely state that narrowing down the history of 1947 and after to partition and independence, to that double event, is becoming less and less convincing. So we know that in these years, a lot of other things were also happening at the same time, and that this also did not stop in 1947. So this is what Prerna basically just said. So activities that were heading into a different direction, that were taking up issues of social conflict, of labor conflict, and of other issues, did not end after partition, but they actually went on, and this period of volatility and of multiple social conflicts would last until at least 1949. So basically, we have an overlap also of events, which is important to see. So the title chosen for the conference is to look at unrealized potentialities of historical development. But I think there's actually also more to it. What is happening in these years is not just about unrealized potentialities. Yes, I think it's correct that the main historical narrative is then narrowed down to the double event of partition and independence, and that most people who have lived in that time also then, in hindsight, tend to organize their own individual memories also according to this to these double events. But what is happening actually is here is also the shaping of the post-colonial period. Okay, so Prerna's presentation, I think, makes that quite visible. So the older idea that for instance, the formal sector is a result of socialist planning, I think can now be safely discarded. So the formal sector emerges, we can now see, from various impulses. So the first one is the war economy, which is very much stressed by Prerna and which is not just true for dock labor. So with a growing interest in issues of productivity and also of creating at least a partially formalized workforce. And then we have this massive labor upsurge after 1945, lasting, as I've just said, until 1949, which it gives a second impulse in creating these more formalized labor relationships. So that planning, when it comes into being, is the third impulse, not the first actually to create this. So we do not actually have just missed opportunities or unrealized potentialities, but we do also have realized potentialities that emerge from these years. And I think that is also important to look into that more, because I think there's more to it. Also in fields of policy that are not related to labor only. Okay, I have 3 questions or 3 comments. How can we take research further from here? How can we push it forward beyond the kind of research that we have and that Robert and Prerna have presented to us now? So from my perspective, one of the difficulties of writing a history of these very volatile years of the war, the post-war period, partition, to write the history of the 1940s is that most of us, all the generations of post-colonial historians, have been living much of their life in more stable historical periods. Okay? When historical change was occurring at a slower speed. And it is very unusual to have moments of acceleration, which were the ones that, just like those that happened in the 1940s, where so many possibilities were actually there, then quick decisions would follow that closed some of these possibilities. So this is not a general feature of historical development. It happens in periods of severe destabilization of political regimes. And I think globally, we are slipping into a situation that is just like that, of an accelerated political development, where political structures get more vulnerable, more likely to destabilize, and where quick shifts, where an acceleration of chronology is likely to happen. And we are badly equipped to deal with that. So because we've grown up, we've learned our craft, as it were, in periods that were quieter. Not really quiet, but moving ahead more slowly than what is happening now. So I think this is really something that requires hard thinking. How do we write histories of periods like those of the 1940s? And here I have 2 points. So I think there has been in much of South Asian history writing a negligence of chronology to some extent. But what we need if we deal with periods like that is very precise chronologies, because the historical situation is shifting all the time. So there are new impulses coming in that are shifting the balance. So I think chronology, not for reasons of the historian's proverbial pedantry, but to understand what is actually happening in periods of acceleration, we need to be very precise with chronologies. And I think that is something that we have to relearn and think about a bit more. And perhaps, so I see that to some extent in Robert's, or I see it to a large extent in Robert's work, that actually is quite present there. But even there, it actually could be more precise in the sense that there could be periodizations. Okay? So in the sense, when are periods, when the main tendency shifts into one direction? When do we have a backlash? When it moves into a different direction? So we need to have a sort of stronger emphasis on analytical chronologies than we have presently in much of our writing, in much of historical writing at present. The second issue is about sources. So very unfortunately, in South Asian history, there has been such a lack of interest in oral history for generations of historians, so that social historians of South Asia have allowed many of the contemporaries to go, basically to leave this world uninterviewed. Yeah, so without being able actually to give their perspective on these decades. This is a big disadvantage, for instance, also as compared with African history, where this tradition has been much stronger. But I think we need other kinds of documents also to be able to understand the quick shifts and the ambivalences and the contradictions that were possible at a particular period. So it sounds very, very strange when Prerna and Robert talk about the quick shifts, people attending a strike and then a riot the next day. And that is happening all the time in this particular period. How is it possible to understand that? I think we need to look at other material as well. And I think that is important. And my last point before I give back the word to the two speakers and then to the audience is this. So your focus, just as mine and my research, is very much on labor. Your presentations make it very visible that here the perspective is even more narrowly on the labor in the two largest industrial metropolises of India at the time. But the volatility of the period that we are looking at is not a metropolitan issue. Okay? So, so the question is, what is happening in the countryside and how is this impacting on what is happening in the cities? How is it impacting on the events that you are looking at? How is the Bengal famine? How is the Tebaga movement impacting on developments in Calcutta, with most of the dock workers coming from Eastern Bengal, for instance? So what are the interactions that we find there? Links to the larger peasant movements of the time, Telangana, for instance, are weaker to Bombay, but they're present. So they're not absent at the time. So Telangana plays a role in Bombay at the time. So how are these different tendencies that cannot be reduced to partition independence, which are very much linked also to the very important developments in princely states, for instance, also at the time. How are they interlinked with the issues of labor that you are looking at? And I think this is how we could push this research a bit further, not actually to look only at the individual instances of political developments that move into a different direction, but also into their interconnection with related developments to come to a different assessment of the period that we're looking at there. Thanks. So I think this is what I would have to contribute, and perhaps in the same sequence as your papers, Robert and Prerna would like to briefly respond, and then we open up the floor.
I think, Ravi, I'll start with your comment on sources. I'll start with your comment on sources. Definitely, when I was writing this paper, the colonial archive is not enough to write something like this. So, like, the entire section on Suraksha Dal is something I actually chanced upon while reading Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, who is extensively writing during this period about Bombay, and who is looking at these neighborhoods, protection groups, and that opens a new world. So I'm still looking for more material, but this idea of all community patrolling group, I think, is quite unique at this period, which might have also brought down the communal writing in the city. And with players like ex-servicemen from INA or IPTA, there are 53 associations which bring out these marches. Somewhere there is a counterpole which is trying to bring things, which doesn't let communal writing or intercommunal clashes become the order of the day. They disrupt that as well. Similarly for RIN, and I just chanced upon 1946 issue of Hans. There is a famous Hindi writer, Kedarnath Agrawal, who is in the city in Bombay at that point of time. And he wrote, he has written a pamphlet called Bombay Ka Rakt Snan, which actually talks about, I don't have the slide right now, which talks about the RIN mutiny, and it contextualizes it in the history of the city, how with mills and everything, in the way Ramayana has, in Chand, how Ramayana has been written in 4 lines. And these are like 84 or 86 chands in 26 pages, which chronicles the entire RIN mutiny. And I think that's a wonderful source to actually start looking at these movements. And like he goes into detail of neighborhoods, barricading to everything. And he was there and he wrote. So I think, yes, we are very bad in terms of oral history. But even if we look at literature closely, we might find sources, and we can't keep on arguing that there is no source anymore. And I take your point in terms of looking at contextualizing Bombay in the broader setup of what is happening in Telangana, because yes, there are a lot of commodity workers in the city as well. And what is happening in broader Telangana or in the hinterlands of Ratnagiri does affect. And I think the subsequent paper will definitely look into it.
Prerna.
Yeah, I'll also say a few points. No, so to start with your comment about the acceleration of history in this period, and how things are shifting so quickly. I mean, one really nice example of this, which I saw, was like, so there is a general strike in Calcutta in July 1946. I think it's 31st of July 1946, and so this is the first general strike in the sense of that word, and in not the sort of jute mill workers striking all over the city, but a general strike organized by the All India Trade Union Congress, announced by them and organized as a general strike for everybody. And the newspapers of the time are not able to say what this is, and they are kind of talking about this event in like they say hartal and bracket strike, then national demonstration, strike, hartal. So there is a lot of it seems the vocabulary to define this event is even kind of not exactly there, and this is the time when it is being defined in the sort of more public sphere. So that I found really interesting. And another example of the sort of basically the demonstrations in the streets meaning different things is also this anecdote that I found in a communist memoir of a CPI activist who was active in the Calcutta docks, is in which he describes the Direct Action Day, which is universally taken in Bengal's historiography as the day of the Great Calcutta Killing, as a day of communal massacre, really, as something that the CPI took the dock workers union to, because workers wanted to, I mean, they thought if they didn't go there, they would lose support. And so this Direct Action Day also, in fact, starting as a national demonstration of sorts, but which has been completely erased in subsequent historiography. So the same events that we kind of know about have sort of different potentialities, and they then are read for those reasons. So that, and yeah, I think the idea of having more analytical chronologies is very useful, because what happens in the strikes in 1942 are very different, and the demands and the rhetoric and the possibilities that they sort of imagine are very different, say, from 1945 to 47, and then after independence. So even the strike leaflets and the rhetoric changes really, really quickly in this. So that's one way of kind of understanding how quick the shifts are, and how this. I mean, we talk about the crisis and the instability of the regime and how it is getting stabilized post independence quite quickly, it seems. So the strike leaflets, it seems, from I looked at also this 1952 strike of the mariners, in which was actually between East and West Bengal. The strike happens in one of the small ports in East Bengal, and is led by communists in Calcutta. And but the rhetoric is very different from what you find in 46. So I just stopped there.
Okay. Thanks to both of you. And yeah, now I'm at a loss, Robert. So I think you have to take over. It's
Yes. Robert, I couldn't really, listen to your entire presentation because I came in a little late. You mentioned Red Mutiny, and I've done some work on Red Mutiny in the archives, and you also mentioned the literature. You see Yashpal's Jhuta Sach. So when I was researching in the archives, I found these characters which are not naval characters, which had actually which had actually planned the mutiny. And in Yashpal's book, you'll find all these characters with the same name mentioned of the Rin Mutiny. So Rin Mutiny needs to be looked at a little more, closely, not just from the nationalist angle, but I think there is more to Rin Mutiny than just nationalism. The other, Prerna, I heard your full paper, and we had a chance to meet also sometime back in Delhi. I liked your paper, and it's fantastic because one thing which I find is missing from our historiography from 42, especially to 46, is the larger presence of the American soldiers here. So we had more than about 100,000 American soldiers present, and they were training about equal number of Chinese soldiers here. And Americans were not just involved in the war, sort of the logistics of the war, in the training of the Chinese soldiers, they're equally involved in a transfer of power. So from the first Cripps mission to the cabinet mission, we had huge American presence and a huge American involvement in this whole issue. So when I was looking at this, we tend to look at all these militant movements or any working class action and associate it with the Soviet communism, sort of. By and large, that is the angle that we adopt. What I think is that period in which the Americans were present here and they were deeply involved in our politics during the war, it is essential to also look at how this impacted, they had the first mover advantage in India. The Soviet Union came in much, much later. So, as you mentioned in your paper, that they were also involved in the managing the docks, because a lot of the ships were coming, a lot of the war material was coming over there. So, it is essential also to look at the fact that how did this American involvement in post-colonial India, did it continue, and in which form the influences continued in our working class movement. And it is, the Americans were very clear that they did not want Soviet Union to have all the fun in managing all the working class movements across the world. So it is very important in that aspect to understand American presence here, which I find is sort of missing in our historiography.
Should we take some more questions and then?
Thanks, Robert and Prerna, for very insightful presentations. I am Prabal. I am working on the UP countryside. So taking from what Professor Ahuja also suggested, I would say that, memoirs are a really useful source for this period, 1940s. So basically, I look at the peasant movement in Unnao and Ghazipur, these two districts of UP, which are very radical, very militant, especially in the post Second World War situation. And I came across memoirs of local leaders like V.D. Tripathi, who is a leader based in Unnao, a mass leader. And then in Ghazipur, you have Sarju Pandey, who later on goes on to become electorally also very successful. So I found these memoirs really helpful in writing an alternative history of late 40s. And I think that maybe we will find something like that for Bombay and Bengal also. One question was there for Robert. When you talk about Bombay, you mentioned the Congress, the CPI, the Muslim League. What about Ambedkar? Because Ambedkar is also based in Bombay during this time, and he has some role in the labor movement also, and of course in the other kind of political movements with which he was associated. So what is Ambedkar, and what are Ambedkarites doing during this time, during the post-World War upsurge in Bombay? Thank you.
So my question is to you, sir. The question is regarding Bombay. When you discuss about the city and the communal writing happening there, my question regarding this Ganpati Utsav, which is very popular in Bombay, and around 1940s, in one of the year, we come across this Lal Baksha Raja dressed up as Neeraj Subhash Chandra Bose, like in the INA uniform, and there is one visual I have come across on social media. So that is my question is about that how these utsavs, Ganpati Utsav to be specific, and the Muharram Tajiyal, which is another very important part of Bombay city life, were affected or were part of this communal rights or the communal harmony in the period of the study you have done.
Prerna, you want to go first?
Okay. And I mean, I think for me, the question was mostly about the American presence in the docks. I don't know so much about the American presence in terms of shaping the trade union movement. I'm sure they tried. But I mean, what I was trying to talk about was more the management and, in fact, how a part, I mean, and the sort of the balance of forces between the allies, in which the British had to hand over, one of the main docks to the Americans, and that kind of allowed then for a kind of new way of working to be visible for rest of the workers, and they worked 3 shifts and they got much better wages, better food, and so that kind of example that the Americans set just for the reasons of wartime efficiency was very helpful for the dockers. So I think that was kind of the limited point I was making about the Americans. And also, in Calcutta, you have a huge number of American soldiers at this time, and not just American soldiers from all over the world. And that, I think we haven't really worked on it, but that's a very interesting also perspective to look at. I mean, and these were, a lot of them were African American soldiers. So the kind of political ideas they would bring with them and traditions that they would have brought with them and how they would have impacted the popular movement would be very interesting to know. But
Okay, I think the book you are talking about is Gita Party Comrade and not Jhuta Sach. Jhuta Sach is on partition. Because RN mutiny is specifically discussed in the Gita Party Comrade. Like, I have that book. It might be in Jhuta Sach also, I don't know. But Gita Party Comrade is actually based around RN mutiny, that one book. Lal Baksha Raja. You see, 1940s also a period where most of the festivals are used to propagate one politics or other. Like Ganesh Utsav has 10 days. In 1940s, in most of these days, you have members of Congress or socialist or left coming. Even Hindu Mahasabha is there. So they all are coming and speaking to people, on non-violence, on even left is going and speaking on workers, union. So somewhere these festivals also give a space where these contending currents are coming and putting up their politics. I haven't seen violence here till now. There might be instances of violence or conflicts, but mostly these were spaces where you can come and put your politics. Definitely, different Ganesh mandals took different positions. Yes, Ganesh Lal Baksha Raja has been dressed as Subhash Chandra Bose. If you look at even previous in 1920s, 30s, tricolors were taken with Ganesh Visarjan. So that politics is not something which is new to 40s. It has been happening even during civil disobedience movement and before that also. Regarding Ambedkar, see, I have looked at the 1938 strike and the coming of left and Ambedkar together, but even for the during my PhD also 40s, I look at demand of Pakistan and what happens to Muslim workers. That's my PhD, and somewhere this is stemming out of that. In the longer article, I'll definitely look at what is happening. Definitely by 46, you see an alliance which is at a very nascent stage, as a very emerging state, but on linguistic state where left, Ambedkar and all are coming together. Initial meeting starts in 1946-47. So somewhere the linguistic reorganization of the state starts becoming an agenda for these forces. But again, I have to look at it much like in terms of labor politics and all. In 46, 47, I have to look at further. The sweeper strike I talked about, left was pretty important part of that strike. So yeah. Do you have a question? Yes.
Sorry, hi, I'm Trisha. This is just by way of adding to possible other sources. I was just thinking when you were speaking of discovering the existence of, what was the word you used for the peace committees? Sorry, in Bombay?
Suraksha Dal.
Suraksha Dal, yeah. So I was just thinking about Begum Anis Kidwai's memoir and the translation of it by Aisha Kidwai, which has a very detailed and lovely and I don't know, I think quite transformative for me account of the Shanti Dal in Delhi. And I suppose there must be many, maybe there are few at least, if not many, accounts from other cities. I mean, if you look at it, and I think I think it's very valuable. I think reading that account of Shanti Dal working as a counter force is a very, perhaps particularly in the times in which we now live, it seems like a particularly inspiring memory to have preserved, where you're not only thinking about the violence, you're also thinking about the people that are preventing or attempting to prevent what could have been worse. That's all, just an addition.
Any other question? So
just a comment, Robert, as again Professor Ahuja mentioned the realized trajectories, the successes which were also there. So he mentioned how formal, sector emerges a lot because of the war situation and then the labor movement. So I would also like to point out about Zamindari abolition, because if you talk about UP, I don't know that much about other states, but in UP, Zamindari abolition again was a big, agenda for the anti-colonial struggle, for the peasant movement, and it is a victory which, is a result of the militant peasant movement which was there during the same time.
absolutely.
So I think that this point is really interesting, apart from the unrealized trajectories. If you look at the victories also, and then the continuation of the struggle, because there is disillusionment also with the post-colonial state. So that there is a continuation also before 1947 and after 1947. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
You mentioned about the Shanti Dals and other. Basically, that is also related to the differences between Nehru and Gandhi on the issue of if in case the Japanese invasion takes place. So Gandhi was of the view that we are not going to, do anything against the Japanese in case they move in, and we will not do anything of that sort. And Gandhi at that stage, initial stages, was also opposed to the American soldiers coming into India. He, in fact, said, why don't the British, recruit our soldiers during the Second World War rather than inviting the Americans there. So to that extent, this was, Shanti Dal was sort of compromise formula, which was the right bet. And Nehru, on the other hand, really wanted a full guerrilla war. He proposed that we should use guerrilla tactics in case the Japanese enter India. So that was, by and large, also one of the reasons why then Shanti Dals were formed and, during the Congress. The other issue was that there was, as I said, the left, we can't consider every left to be Soviet Union, because in 1940s, the American Workers' Party established Bolshevik-Leninist Workers' Party of India in Ceylon. And this finally merged into CSP later after independence. But I'm saying the political waters were quite murky, and there were a lot of other people entering at that stage in the 40s.
Thank you. So before I invite Monica for a formal vote of thanks, I really want to thank all of you for coming on a Friday in the middle of a mid-semester. I know how hard it is. And thank you, Ravi and Prerna, and Ravi for chairing the session, and Prerna joining and presenting your paper. Now, Monica, please.
Thank you so much, Ravi. Thank you very much, Robert, Prerna, for this session. Let's give them a round of applause. Ravi, we tried to turn the camera onto the audience in between so that we can realize who's in the room. Okay, I'm not audible. Good. Okay, sorry, my mic was off. I was reminded. Well, anyways, thank you so much, everybody. We'll wrap up here. Just take 1 minute to thank everybody who contributed to making this a very, very successful event. A big thanks to Max Weber Forum. I know that Sebastian is not here, but he was here in the morning and you all heard him during the inaugural. But really, they were a great partner, and we're glad that we came together to organize this wonderful conference today. I wanted to thank Sebastian for his generosity and consideration. We'll maybe replay this video to him so that he hears it. A very deep and sincere thanks to all the speakers for joining us for the session today, in person and virtually. Aniket, Nilanjana, Prerna, Robert, Sharmishta, and Santosh, and the chairs, Ravi and Shugato. Some of them traveled from far as Singapore. Nilanjana was here from Singapore, as you know. Ravi, I know it's now a decent time for you, but I know some of the speakers joined really late in the evening of their own respective time zones. So really thank them for that. I really want to thank Shugato and Robert. I know Shugato is not here, for putting together this conference, which none of us would have come to this room unless they put together this wonderful agenda, wonderful panel of speakers and the session. So thank you again. Shugato has been a wonderful support to us for the India Fellowships program, continued support, including mentoring for Robert. So I'll play this for him too when we play the video. A big thanks to the small team in Delhi office in all their work in putting together the conference. Amit, Angarika, Shreya and Sushma, and an India fellow. The other India fellow, Rinan, who has stepped out, I see. Also, thanks to the Cambridge office. We have our other office at Boston in Cambridge, and this is not the UK Cambridge, this is the Boston Cambridge where Harvard is located. So thanks to our office and the team there for all their support from far. And last but not the least, all the audience members. Without you, it's not possible to do a conference. So thank you very much in participating in the conversations, listening intently, being here for a long duration since morning till now. And we wish you all a great rest of the evening, a great weekend ahead. Thank you again for joining us, but be in touch. We have a lot of events that we organize every month, sometimes more than once a month. Follow us on our social media, join us on our newsletter mailing list. You'll hear about our events. We do a lot of things on different issues of South Asia. So whatever interests you, please join us. Thank you again, and we'll wrap up here, and a great evening to all of you. Thank you. Thank you, Ravi and Prerna. Thank you very much for joining us online. Thanks. Bye. Take care.